Hello and welcome to part 2 of the My Monthly Hero 5 Cards from 1 Kit June 2023 video. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll link it in the description below. At the end of part 1, I was left over with some shells from the last card, and I decided that I would make a background that depicted the sea with a lot of bubbles bubbling up from it. So I cut an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock into two, and this is probably the fastest ink blending you'll ever see. I think there's 12 minutes of ink blending here that I've reduced down to under 1 minute. So I've used those three colors that you see in the ink cubes, and as soon as I finish grinding this ink into the paper, I take my distress sprayer, which has water in it, and I'm going to pull the trigger very slowly so that the water comes out in larger droplets rather than a fine mist of spray. And then, after the water has sat on the paper for a few seconds, I take a paper towel, and you want to let that water sit on there for a few seconds just so it soaks into the paper. And then when I pull it up, it looks like a bubbly ocean, and I just love that. So then you want to dry that for sure to make sure it's really dry before you move on to the next step. And here I have a slimline die which measures 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. So a regular slimline I think is 3 by 8 approximately, and this is a mini slimline, so it's 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. So my idea was to use the leftover paper to create some letters for the front of the card, and I'm doing that here. But when I got the letters all cut out, I realized that I didn't have enough letters to spell what I wanted to say, which was seize the day. I didn't have the T, H, and the E. So I had to be creative, and I took one of the A's and I cut it out the middle of it and I made it a V. So I thought maybe I'd put vitamin C's, or vitamin C is the expression you hear these days, but I didn't have a period. So then I cut out some other letters and from some other paper, and I thought I'll take it CZ. But this was looking like a little bit too much color for me. So what I did was cut those same letters out of white paper, and I'm glad I did that because for two reasons. When you have two sets of letters and you glue them together, it makes the letters more substantial, for one. You can even cut 3 layers of letters. But the other reason that I'm glad I did this was because when I was gluing them together, I unintentionally made a drop shadow effect by not placing them perfectly on top of each other. And then I thought, oh, I like this. Maybe I'll just continue to have this drop shadow effect going on here. So I did that for all of the letters. And if I was to do this again, I would make the drop shadow effect even more pronounced. You can barely see it there. There's just a hint of the color coming through, but I really like the way that looks, and I'm eager to try that again. So I can't wait for the next time that I can double up the letters and do that all over again. And I think that the white on the colored background just looks so much better than the color on the colored background, because it's all about contrast, right? Contrast is one of those rules of design where you want things to contrast well. So here's another tip. Those geometry sets that you might have hanging around in your desk, or sometimes you see at thrift stores for really cheap, the right-angled ruler from the geometry set makes a really nice line it up tool for your alphas when you're going to put them on the front of a card, especially a slimline card like this. So all you have to do, obviously, is line up one side of the ruler against the side of your card, and then you have a straight platform on which to put your letters. And you also have like a little jut out there, so it's just perfect for putting letters on with. And then I wanted the CZ to be not straight because the C's are tumultuous, right? They're bubbly and tumultuous, so I'm trying to mimic that. And then I cut a nice piece of purple out for the matting layer, which I think goes nicely with the purple in the card. And then I cut out a base, which I guess was probably 3 1/2 by 6 1/2, if I'm guessing correctly. I can't remember. I kind of just eyeballed it, but this is a nice size of card. It's like a slimline card, but it's like a more manageable size. It's just not probably easy to find envelopes for it, but I'm probably just going to make my own envelope for this card. Now the kit came with this beautiful little bag of embellishments, and I could not resist putting a ton of them on here because there was already a bubble effect going on with the front of the card, and so now I wanted to add to that by putting sparkly bubbles on the front of the card, and this did not disappoint. The more I put on, the better it looked, and I just kind of probably overdid it. Now I want to show you these finger cots. I picked these up a couple of years ago, and I haven't used them yet, so I was thinking they'd be good if you had a special event to go to, say a wedding or something the next day, and you wanted to get inky the day before. You don't have to worry about putting gloves on. Like, who wants to put gloves on when they're crafting? But I thought these would be great just to cover the ends of your fingers when you're doing some ink blending. But I'm going to tell you that I don't know if it's because I have large fingers or whether they're just tight because they have to be tight so that they stay on. But after having these finger cots on my fingers, just for the length of time it took me to do the ink blending on this card, my fingers were sore. They almost felt like the circulation was being cut off. So I don't know if that would be the same for everyone, or if that's just because, like I say, my fingers might be slightly larger than other people's. I don't really know. I'm sure we all have different size fingers, so they may work for you. They did work from keeping the ink off my fingers, though, for sure. So if I was in a pinch, I probably would use those again if I, really didn't want my fingers to get inky. Anyway, I'm just using 3 colors to blend a quick rainbow here, and I'm going to do this onto 2 cards, and I'm masking off the area because I want to leave some white space on my card. So I should have masked it all off at the beginning, but I guess I didn't know how big I was going to make the rainbow. So I make the rainbow, and then we'll have the peel away segment here where we get to see the nice crisp line, which is always great. But what happened was, when I was making the second rainbow, I think it was this one, and I went to peel back the tape, there wasn't a crisp line. There was actually some blue that had gotten underneath the tape. So here I'm just showing you the difference between the 2 backgrounds. One's got a little more green, and one I just went a little less heavy-handed, and I don't have as much ink on there. So a great way to get rid of the extra ink is by using one of these mono sand erasers. If you don't have one of these, please get one of these. These are fantastic for getting some stray ink off your paper. If you see you can barely see it after I take it off. If you have a really dark ink stain, I don't think it would work for that, but if you just get a little bit of light ink on there, it comes off beautifully. So I trimmed this card down a little bit, because I knew that I was going to mat it onto another white card front. And then I just decided to, because this is such a beautiful background, you don't need to do much else, so I just used the Lighthouse stamp to stamp a silhouette. And I'm going to stamp some birds, but I just stamp off once before I stamp the birds, just so that they're a little bit lighter, and they could have been even lighter than that. I wanted them to look a little bit further away, but I should have probably stamped off twice, but it looks okay. And then I am adding a sentiment which says happy birthday, and that is the end of this card. It's just so easy to do that. Now I made another card that was very similar, and I want to show you that if your stamping is not perfect and you're disappointed with that, you can take a micron pen, and there's no reason you can't just go around the edges of that stamp and make it a little more perfect if you like. You can also do that, as I'm showing you, with the sentiment, which can sometimes be, very fine, and so a micron pen does that beautifully. Okay, so now we're on we're on card number 4, and I'm going to make a mixed media background, and I'm doing that by doing some ink smooshing. And if you didn't know, if you ink smoosh onto glass, you will get a puddle of ink, and when you dip your paper into it, you'll get a pretty standard puddle. But if you use a craft mat like this, you get those little bubbles, those little ink bubbles, and that creates an even more interesting background. So it's really all about what you're looking for. If you want just one big large pool of ink, or do you want these little bubbles? So then after I did that, I went back with some color just to fill in the white spaces mainly on the left hand background. The right hand one, I wanted to leave some white because my idea for this card was to make some portraits, some silhouette portraits out of these smaller stamps. And so I'm strategically placing these stamps onto this background so that they'll all have a different background when I cut them out. So the lady's got some pink and some orange, the boy has just orange and some white and some some ink dots, and then the dog is going to have just two colors of orange as a background. And so I'm using some nesting dies to do this, which makes making a frame really, really easy. And there is a square set of nesting dies here, and there's a rectangular set. And these are both made by Tim Holtz. And there I'm showing it to you. It's Tim Holtz by Sizzix. And there you get a whole bunch of frame dies. You get, I think, five sets. And there's 5 in a set, I think. So if you want to make a bunch at once, it makes it really easy. So I'm just cutting out now the frame for these pictures, as I was saying. And then I'm just going to make a background for the card. And because the pictures are so colorful, I'm going to make the background very plain. So I just, stamp the sun, and then I'm going to stamp the clouds. And then I'm going to arrange them so that they're in a triangular shape. And I put some very thin foam tape on the back so that they stand up a little bit off the card. Oop, I got that one stuck on the card. And then all I'm going to do after this is add a sentiment, and I'm keeping the sentiment in the same color as the clouds so that it doesn't detract from the photos, because the photos, or the portraits, or whatever you want to call them, the framed pictures are really the star of the show. I just wanted there to be some sort of background. So I'm stamping some birds, again in that light gray ink, so as not to detract from the photos. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just to ink blend some yellow out from the middle of the sun so that it is a little less circle-like. Now here's another card that I didn't have time to edit the video for, so I'll just quickly tell you how I made it. I cut the oval palm tree die out of the other piece of mixed media cardstock that I had, and I popped the background pieces out, and I was left with just the palm trees. So I inked the palm trees with green ink, and then I popped, just like a jigsaw puzzle, I popped the mixed media pieces back in, and I just cut it in half, and I took the palm tree from the right hand side and stacked it here with the palm tree on the left hand side. I ink blended the background with a pale yellow ink, and then I put splatters of pink and orange, added the sentiment, and that's another card. And there's one more card at the very end of the video that's similar to another card in the video that I also didn't have time to edit it for. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!